Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows. Welcome to part 2 of my board bow building project. In this video, I'm going to talk about the tools that we're going to need for the job, and we're going to lay out the design of the bow on the board. For tools, I'm trying to keep things fairly simple and cheap, but not totally minimalist. I'm going to be working with all hand tools, and so I'm going to show you a few of the things that I've got and what I'm planning on using them for. So for most boards, you're going to need some kind of saw to cut off at least to cut off the end that you don't need. This is one of those Japanese pull saws. Works really good for cutting off ends of staves and boards and that sort of thing. But whatever you've got will work fine, whether it's a skill saw or a hand saw. It doesn't matter, just something to get your board to length. We're going to need a few measuring tools, like a tape measure and a ruler and a pencil for laying out the bow. The next step is going to be roughing out the bow, getting off the excess wood outside of the lines that we draw. And for that, I think a draw knife is a really great tool. The best draw knives, in my opinion, are ones that you can get that are old from like an antique store or a flea market or something like that. As long as it's got good steel, you can put a new edge on it, and shouldn't pay any more than $20 or $30 for a decent draw knife. Then I've got a farrier's rasp. These are easy to pick up on Amazon. I think this one cost me like 25 bucks. Super sharp, should last a long time. The brand on this one is Save Edge. It's been good, I like it. Something to do contours and rounded parts. This is called a microplane. It has different attachments. Any kind of rounded rasp would do. And then a card scraper is a great tool for the final tillering work. Gives you really even, consistent wood removal that you can have a lot of control over. You're going to want some kind of little round file to do the string grooves. Some sandpaper once all the tillering is done. I usually use 150 grit first, then 220, and then 320. And then to finish this bow, I'm going to use something called VHT wheel paint, the matte clear. It's definitely not primitive, but it's easy to use. It dries quickly. It has a nice look to it. It's matte, so it's not going to be shiny. It's a good option for just a quick, durable, good-looking finish. You can pick this up for like $8 at an AutoZone. There's lots of finishes that can work. Don't hesitate to use what you've got. I just wanted to pick something for this project that most people would be able to find relatively easily and cheaply. So in addition to these other tools, you're going to need something to hold your work still. And there's a lot of options for that. You can use clamps and a solid surface like a workbench or a deck rail or something like that. Bench vices work well. There's a few specialized products specifically for bow making called the Stave Press and the Stave Master, which are great options, but they can be a little bit more expensive. I'll be using a variety of methods to hold the stave still while I'm working on it through this video, so you can see some different ideas. Now that we've got our board picked out, we've got our tools ready, the next step is going to be to lay out the design on the bow. Now, I have to think about which side I want to be the back and which side I want to be the belly of the bow. Both sides look good on this stave in terms of grains and knots, but there's one thing this stave is offering. It's got a little bit of a sway to it, and if I used this side as the back, that would mean that my bow would start with a little bit of deflex, which I don't think is ideal in terms of performance. If I use this side as the back, then it'll have a little bit of reflex. It probably won't be there when I'm finished making the bow, but it'll be a little bit of something to work with. So I'm going to use this as the back, so I'm going to draw out the design of my bow on the back of this board right here. First thing I'm going to do is take a look at the dimensions of the board that I'm working with here. This particular board is 3¼ inches wide, and it is a true 1 inch thick. So I'm not going to use all of this width. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to draw a line straight down the center of this board. You could pop a chalk line. I'm going to use this square here. So half of 3¼ is going to be 1 inch and 5/8. So I'm just going to lock my pencil in here at 1 inch and 5/8, and I'm just going to take this down the length of the board. So this board is a 10-foot board. Obviously I don't need the whole length of it. So I'm going to take a moment and look to see what the grain is looking like and if there's any section of the board that appears to be better than the rest. So what I see is on this end and out on this end, there's a little bit more of a runoff. I think that the grain twists a little bit, but in the center section of the board it's quite straight. So I think I'm going to make a mark right about here, and I'm going to measure from there. I'm designing this bow to safely accommodate a 28-inch draw length, and the rule of thumb that we typically use for self bows, whether it's a board bow or a stave bow, to determine a safe length for the bow to accommodate a given draw length, is we double the draw length, which in this case 28 plus 28 equals 56. But we also need to take into account the section of our bow that's not going to be bending, and that's going to be the handle and the section and the fades on either side. And that's going to be a total of 8 inches on this bow. And so I'm going to add 8 inches to that 56. So 56 plus 8 makes 64. So 64 inches would be a good safe length from nock to nock on our bow. I'm going to make our bow 66, which is just going to give us a little bit of extra to work with, a little bit of a safety margin. I don't want to make it too much extra because then we're going to start losing efficiency. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to measure . So I said 66, but that's our nock to nock length. So I'm going to measure 68 inches, and that's going to be our overall bow length, and that'll give us just 1 inch on either side. That'll give us 1 inch on either side to have as tips past the string grooves. So I'm going to completely lay out the bow before I cut off the sections that I don't need. I always like to double check everything at the end of laying it out, just to make sure that everything's right before I cut the board. So we have our center line. We have the overall length of our bow. So now I'm going to find the center point lengthwise here. So half of 68 is 34. So I'm going to make a mark here at 34 inches. And this is the center of our bow. We're going to lay out the handle and the fades next. So our handle is going to be 4 inches long. So 2 inches to either side of our handle, or I'm sorry, 2 inches to either side of our center line will give us our handle. Our handle is going to be 1 inch wide. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch to either side of the center line. I'm going to connect those dots. And then we need a transition from our thicker handle down to our thinner working limb, and we call that area the fades. So our fades are going to be 2 inches long, so I'm going to measure out 2 inches away from the end of our handle. And our fade is going to be 2 inches wide. So I'm going to measure 1 inch out from either side of our center line. And then I'm going to connect the dots here. And this gives us our transition from our narrow handle out to our wide working limb. So for this design, for this particular bow, I'm going to make what's called a pyramid design. And all that means is that this right here at the end of the fades is going to be the widest point of the bow, and it's going to taper directly down to 1/2 inch at the tip. Another popular flat bow design is called the American flat bow, and it's similar to the pyramid, but instead of tapering directly, it will maintain this 2-inch width all the way out to mid-limb, and then from mid-limb it will taper down to the 1/2 inch point. But don't worry too much about that. Just know that we're building a pyramid bow, and then it's going to taper directly from this 2-inch width down to 1/2 inch at the tip, and I'll show you how we do that. Before we leave the handle area here, I want to talk about the handle thickness and how we're going to deal with that. So when you're working with a board, obviously it's only so thick, and unless you're working with a really thick board, you're going to have to deal with the fact that the bow is going to want to bend in the handle area because it's not thick enough. And there's really 2 main ways of addressing that. One is to make the handle wider than we've made it, but allow the bow to bend all the way through the handle. Or we can glue what's called a riser block onto the belly of the handle and leave the handle stiff and narrower. Both of them are viable options. I'm going to glue a riser block onto this bow, mainly because I think that's the more popular option. I think most people that are building bows feel more comfortable having a stiff handle that gives them something more to hold on to. So I'm going to go that route with this build, but just know that you don't have to do that if you don't feel like taking on that extra step of gluing on a riser. Just know that you can leave your handle a bit wider and you can bend the bow through the handle. It just is a slightly different design. So here at the end of our bow, where the tip is, I'm going to make the tip 1/2 inch wide. So I'm going to measure 1/4 inch to either side of our center line. Now to create the width profile, I'm simply going to connect these dots from this 1/2 inch width here all the way to the 2-inch wide fades. It's just going to be a straight line. So get yourself a long straight edge of some sort. Could be another board. Just make sure that it's a true straight line. So here's the layout of our limb. A 4-inch long, 1-inch wide handle, a 2-inch long, 2-inch wide fade that tapers directly down to our 1/2 inch wide tip. Now I'm simply going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So here's our whole bow. 68 inches long, which will become 66 inches nock to nock. Pyramid design. I'm going to double check my bow length here. To make sure it's actually 68 inches. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim off the extra wood here that I don't need. So we've got our bow all laid out here. It's ready to rough out, and it's ready to add the riser block. I just wanted to make another note about bow design. So I told you that I was designing this to draw out to 28 inches, and I'm also planning on having this bow be around 50 pounds in draw weight, sorry. We've got the bow all laid out. Our next step is going to be roughing it out and adding our riser block, and that's what we'll do in the next video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.